At my parents' luxury anniversary dinner, my sister sneered across the table, telling me not to fill my plate since I did not contribute a single penny to the meal. My mother smiled and said, "Real family comes first." I simply nodded, put on my coat, and left. Moments later, the restaurant manager delivered a $4,000 bill to my brother-in-law. The woman in the red dress canceled the reservation payment and asked me to hand this to you, he announced. I watched through the window of my chauffeured car as their faces drained of color. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who mistook your silence for weakness. I am Camille. I am 33 years old, and for the majority of my life, I was the designated scapegoat of my family. Growing up in a household where megachurch status and outward appearances meant more than actual love, I learned early on that my worth was measured by how well I made my parents look to their congregation. My father Desmond and my mother Vivian cared about exactly two things: their standing at Zion Fellowship Megachurch, and my younger sister Jasmine. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and they had insisted on hosting the dinner at Lumiere. Lumiere was the most exclusive upscale restaurant in the city, a place where reservations took 6 months to secure, and the minimum spend for a private alcove was staggering. I arrived in a custom-tailored red silk dress, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and guarded optimism. I had spent the last decade building my own luxury event management and catering empire, completely cutting myself off from my family financial strings. But I still showed up to these events, hoping that maybe, just maybe, things would be different. They never were. I sat at the edge of the long mahogany table, quietly eating my heirloom tomato salad. The ambient lighting of the restaurant cast a golden glow over the crystal glasses and expensive silverware. To my left sat Jasmine, my 30-year-old sister. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She wore a designer dress that I knew for a fact she could not afford, constantly adjusting her posture to make sure her jewelry caught the light. Next to her sat Trent, her white husband. Trent was 34 and proudly referred to himself as a crypto entrepreneur. In reality, he was a chronically unemployed leech who used corporate buzzwords to mask the fact that he had not earned a legitimate paycheck in years. Vivian and Desmond were holding court at the center of the table, waving and smiling at several prominent church elders who happened to be seated in the adjacent dining area. They were in their element, performing the role of the perfect, wealthy, successful family. I kept my head down, focusing on my food and trying to remain invisible. But invisibility is a luxury you are rarely afforded when your family uses you to elevate themselves. Jasmine leaned over her eyes, flashing with that familiar petty cruelty she had perfected since childhood. "You know, Camille," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for the table to hear, "you really should not fill your plate like that. This menu is priced per item, and since you did not contribute a single penny to this dinner, you should probably stick to the free bread." The conversation around the table ground to a halt. I slowly lowered my fork. Trent let out a short, condescending snicker. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive bourbon. "Jasmine has a point, Camille," he said with a smug smile. "You need to understand how wealth generation works. When you are actually funding these kinds of high-level lifestyle experiences, you earn your seat at the table. You should take notes on how real wealth operates instead of just tagging along. Maybe that little party planning hobby of yours would finally take off if you understood basic economics." My little party planning hobby. That was what they called my multi-million-dollar event management firm. They had no idea that my company orchestrated the largest corporate buyouts in the state, or that I employed over 200 people. They assumed because I did not flaunt designer labels on social media or brag about my bank account that I was still the same broke, struggling girl they had abandoned years ago. I looked at my mother, expecting her to intervene. Instead, Vivian offered a tight, patronizing smile. "Now, Trent, be gentle with her," Vivian said, smoothing her napkin over her lap. "We invited Camille because it is the Christian thing to do. Real family comes first, even when they are struggling." Just let your sister enjoy the spotlight, Camille. Trent has been making some brilliant investments lately, and Jasmine deserves to celebrate her husband's success without any of your usual bitterness. The audacity of the statement washed over me like ice water. My mind instantly flashed back to my sophomore year at Spelman College. I was 19 years old, maintaining a perfect grade point average and working 2 campus jobs to cover my books. Vivian and Desmond had promised to pay my tuition, but midway through the semester the payments stopped. When I called home in a panic begging for an explanation, Vivian coldly informed me that they had redirected my college funds to pay for Jasmine elite pageant coaches and her new wardrobe. They needed Jasmine to win the state title for their social standing. I was evicted from my dorm 2 weeks later. I slept in my beat-up sedan for 3 months, surviving on cafeteria leftovers and selling baked goods out of my trunk just to buy gas. I built my empire from the concrete up, while they poured thousands into Jasmine's failed modeling career, and later into Trent bankrupt ventures. They did not know that I knew Trent consulting firm had filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. I knew he was draining Vivian and Desmond retirement accounts to fund his crypto gambling. I knew Jasmine's lifestyle was entirely subsidized by credit card debt and my parents' enabling behavior. I knew all of it. But sitting there looking at their smug, satisfied faces, I realized something incredibly liberating. I did not need to argue with them. I did not need to prove my worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I did not say a word. I picked up my linen napkin, gracefully dabbed the corners of my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my half-eaten salad. I pushed my chair back and stood up, smoothing the front of my red dress. The table watched me in confusion. "Where are you going?" Trent asked, his brow furrowing. "You cannot even handle a little constructive criticism." I ignored him. I walked over to where my parents were sitting, leaned down, and pressed a polite kiss to my mother's cheek, and then my father. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Enjoy your evening." Before anyone could formulate a response, I turned and walked away. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor of the restaurant. I felt a tremendous weight lifting off my shoulders with every step I took away from that table. I navigated through the softly lit dining room, moving past the tables of wealthy patrons and church elders until I reached the grand foyer. Standing near the maitre d' desk was Elias, the general manager of Lumiere. Elias and I went way back. My catering company frequently partnered with his restaurant to handle massive overflow events and elite corporate galas. We had generated millions in revenue together over the past 3 years. When he saw me walking out alone, his professional smile shifted into a look of genuine concern. "Camille," he said, stepping forward. "Is everything all right? You are leaving so soon. The main course has not even been fired yet." I offered him a warm, authentic smile. "Elias, everything is perfectly fine, but I need to ask you for a favor." "Of course, name it," he replied, immediately pulling up my reservation on his tablet. "You know the corporate black card I put on file to secure the reservation and cover the $4,000 minimum spend for the alcove?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. "Yes, I have it right here," Elias said, tapping the screen. "I need you to remove my card from the file immediately," I instructed. "Cancel my payment authorization. Print out the itemized bill for the appetizers, the vintage bourbon, the champagne, and the minimum alcove charge. Take the physical receipt over to the man sitting next to my sister. The white guy in the blue blazer. Hand it directly to him." Elias paused, his fingers hovering over the screen. He looked from me toward the distant alcove where my family was sitting, and then back to me. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He was well aware of my net worth, and he could read the situation with the sharp intuition of a veteran hospitality manager. "Consider it done," Camille, Elias said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Shall I inform them that the host has departed?" "Just tell them the woman in the red dress canceled the reservation payment," I said, pulling my coat over my shoulders. "Have a wonderful night, Elias." I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of Lumiere and into the crisp evening air. The valet immediately signaled for my driver, and within moments my black SUV pulled smoothly up to the curb. I climbed into the spacious back seat, settling into the plush leather. But I did not tell my driver to pull away just yet. The rear windows of the SUV were heavily tinted, offering me a perfect, unobstructed view into the restaurant's expansive front windows, which looked directly into the dining area. I sat back, crossed my legs, and watched. It took exactly 4 minutes. Through the glass, I saw Elias approaching the alcove holding a sleek black leather check presenter. He walked with impeccable posture, bypassing Desmond and Vivian, stopping squarely next to Trent. I watched as Elias leaned down, speaking with polite professionalism as he placed the leather folder directly onto Trent's plate. Even from the street, I could read the immediate shift in the room dynamic. Trent picked up the folder with a dismissive wave, attempting to maintain his wealthy entrepreneur persona in front of his in-laws. He opened it. I saw his posture completely rigidify. His head snapped up, looking around the room for me. Jasmine grabbed the receipt from his hand, and her mouth dropped open in an exaggerated gasp. My mother, Vivian, suddenly leaned over, grabbing Trent's arm. The performance was unraveling. Trent frantically pulled a credit card from his wallet and handed it to Elias. Elias took it, swiped it on his handheld terminal, and shook his head. Declined. Trent's face turned a violent shade of red. He began patting his pockets, pulling out a second card. Elias swiped it, shook his head again, declined. Jasmine began frantically tapping on her phone, her face contorted in panic. My father, Desmond, stood up, his chest puffing out as he tried to argue with Elias. But Elias maintained his cool professional demeanor, simply pointing to the bottom line of the receipt. The church elders sitting at the nearby tables had stopped eating. They were turning in their seats, openly staring at the spectacle unfolding in the middle of the luxury restaurant. The prominent, respected pastor family was publicly defaulting on a massive dinner bill. My phone, sitting on the seat beside me, lit up. The screen displayed Jasmine's name. I watched it vibrate, listening to the low hum of the device against the leather. I did not answer. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. This time it was Vivian, then Trent, then Desmond. I watched through the window as Trent threw his napkin on the floor, shouting at Elias, while Desmond desperately tried to empty his wallet, pulling out whatever cash he had. It was not nearly enough to cover a $4,000 minimum spend plus vintage alcohol. The humiliation was absolute, and it was entirely of their own making. They had demanded I know my place, and I had simply obliged. If I did not contribute a penny, then I surely was not going to pay the bill. I picked up my phone and opened my settings. With a few quick taps, I switched the device to Do Not Disturb. The screen immediately populated with a flood of text messages. Jasmine, where the hell did you go? Trent cards are locked because of a fraud alert. Get back here right now and pay this. Jasmine. Camille. I swear to God, if you do not come back here, the restaurant is threatening to call the police. Trent, you think you are funny. You are going to pay for this, you bitter psycho. Get back here. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head at their sheer delusion. Even in the midst of their own financial ruin, they still felt entitled to demand my resources. They still believed they could command me like a disobedient child. I watched as security personnel began approaching their table. Vivian was sobbing into her hands, her perfect church lady image completely shattered. The final notification that popped up on my screen was a voicemail transcription from Vivian. I tapped it, reading the frantic automated text. Camille, you have humiliated this family in front of the entire congregation. Your father is having palpitations. We are coming to your office tomorrow morning, and you will pay for embarrassing us like this. You have gone too far this time. I locked my phone and tossed it into my designer handbag. I looked at the driver through the rearview mirror. Take me home, Marcus, I said, leaning my head back against the headrest and closing my eyes. I have an early morning tomorrow. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the city traffic, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was just beginning, and I knew my family would unleash everything they had to try and drag me back down to their level. They thought they could ambush me. They thought they could intimidate me in my own domain. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with anymore. The scared 19-year-old girl crying in her car was dead. In her place was a woman who had built a fortress of wealth, power, and impenetrable boundaries. Let them come to my office, I thought to myself. Let them walk right into the trap. I left them sitting there in their delusion. The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining alcove closed behind me, muting the sound of my family and their performative laughter. I navigated through the softly lit main dining room of Lumiere. The restaurant was a masterpiece of modern design with cascading crystal chandeliers and plush velvet booths. Usually I love the ambiance here, but tonight the air felt suffocating until I finally reached the grand foyer. Standing near the host stand was Elias, the general manager. Elias was a seasoned hospitality veteran who ran this establishment with military precision. He and I had a mutual respect built on years of highly lucrative collaborations. Just last month, my event management firm had bought out the entire restaurant for a tech billionaire retirement gala. We had coordinated a flawless 7-course service for 300 guests. Elias knew exactly who I was. He knew my net worth, my work ethic, and my influence in the city elite corporate circles. My parents, on the other hand, thought I was barely scraping by throwing children birthday parties. When Elias saw me approaching, his professional smile shifted into an expression of genuine concern. "Camille," he said, stepping away from the host stand, "you are leaving us so soon. The main course has not even been fired yet. Is everything all right with the service?" I offered him a warm, authentic smile, feeling the physical tension slowly leaving my shoulders. "Elias, the service is impeccable as always," I assured him, "but my company for the evening has proven to be entirely intolerable. I am going to head home early." Elias nodded, his eyes darting briefly toward the corridor leading to the private alcove. He possessed the sharp intuition of a man who dealt with high society drama on a nightly basis. "I am very sorry to hear that, Camille," he said, his voice lowering to a discreet volume. "Shall I have the valet bring your car around?" "Yes, please," I replied. "But before I go, I need to ask you for a massive favor regarding the bill." Elias pulled up his tablet, his fingers hovering over the screen. "Of course. You have your corporate black card on file for the $4,000 minimum spend for the alcove. Would you like me to process the payment now so you can depart without any further hassle?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "Actually, Elias, I want you to do the exact opposite. I need you to remove my card from the file immediately. Cancel my payment authorization entirely." Elias paused. He looked at the screen and then back at me. "I want you to print out the itemized bill." I continued, keeping my voice conversational but firm. "Print the charges for the imported caviar, the vintage bourbon Trent ordered, the champagne my mother requested, and the full minimum alcove charge. Put it all in one of your nice black leather check presenters and walk it directly over to the man sitting next to my sister, the smug guy in the blue blazer. Hand it straight to him." A slow, knowing smile spread across Elias' face. He understood exactly what was happening. As a manager who dealt with arrogant patrons daily, he likely harbored his own distaste for Trent, entitled attitude, and the way my family had been treating the waitstaff. "Consider it done, Camille," he said smoothly, tapping the screen to delete my payment information. "The host has officially departed." I thanked him and stepped out the heavy glass front doors into the crisp evening air. The city streets were alive with the hum of traffic and the glow of streetlights. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, waiting for my private driver to arrive. Standing there on the pavement, looking back through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of the restaurant, a wave of profound irony washed over me. I watched my mother Vivian laughing and raising her glass inside, completely oblivious to the reality of her situation. She had just told me that real family comes first. She had demanded I let my sister enjoy the spotlight because Trent was supposedly making brilliant investments. The sheer delusion was almost laughable. My mind drifted back to a painfully vivid memory from 14 years ago. I was 19 years old, a sophomore at Spelman College. I was carrying a perfect grade point average, working 2 campus jobs in the library and the dining hall just to cover my textbooks and daily expenses. Vivian and Desmond had promised to handle my tuition. It was the one thing they had sworn to provide. But midway through the fall semester, I received a devastating notice from the bursar office. The payments had stopped. My account was in severe arrears. Panicked and terrified, I called home from a payphone outside the student center. My mother answered. When I begged for an explanation, she spoke with a coldness that still echoed in my mind today. She casually informed me that they had to redirect my college funds. Jasmine, who was fresh out of high school, had decided she wanted to be a pageant queen. Vivian and Desmond had drained my tuition money to pay for elite pageant coaches' custom evening gowns and professional photo shoots. They needed Jasmine to win the state title to elevate their social standing within their church community. When I pleaded with them, explaining that I would be kicked out of school, Vivian simply sighed and told me I was being selfish. She said I needed to figure it out on my own because Jasmine Dream was an investment in the family future. 2 weeks later, I was evicted from my dormitory. I packed everything I owned into 2 trash bags and a duffel bag. With nowhere to go and no family willing to take me in, I slept in the back seat of my beat-up sedan for 3 months. I remember the biting cold of those Atlanta nights, wrapping myself in every sweater I owned, crying until my throat ached and my eyes were swollen shut. While Jasmine was getting her hair professionally styled for pageants she would inevitably lose, I was washing my face in gas station bathrooms. I survived by selling baked goods out of my trunk to local barbershops and hair salons. I clawed my way up from the absolute bottom. I turned those baked goods into a small catering gig. I turned that small gig into a legitimate business. I poured every ounce of my sweat tears and relentless ambition into building an empire. I became a millionaire through sheer force of will, while they continued to pour thousands into Jasmine's failed modeling career and later into Trent bankrupt ventures. They assumed I was broke because I refused to fund their lifestyle. They mistook my quiet humility for failure. They had no idea I was the one holding the safety net they so desperately relied upon to keep their own house out of foreclosure. They thought they could sit in a luxury restaurant that I did business with, eat food that I had secured with my reputation, and then look down their noses at me. A sleek black sport utility vehicle pulled up to the curb, snapping me out of my memories. My private driver stepped out and opened the rear door for me. I paused with one hand on the door frame. I could not resist looking back through the glass windows of Lumiere one last time. Inside, I saw Elias walking purposefully across the main dining room. He held a sleek black leather check presenter in his right hand. His posture was perfectly straight, his face a mask of hospitality, professional neutrality. I watched as he approached my family table, bypassing Desmond and Vivian entirely. He stopped squarely next to Trent. The trap was sprung and I was completely free, I settled into the soft leather seat of my chauffeured SUV, feeling the heavy doors seal shut and block out the city noise. The cabin was perfectly quiet, a stark contrast to the storm I knew was about to hit inside the restaurant. My driver David glanced at me through the rearview mirror, asking if I was ready to head home. I told him to wait just a few minutes. I needed to see this. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Lumiere offered a crystal-clear view into the main dining room. From the safety of the dark-tinted vehicle, I had the perfect vantage point. I watched Elias navigate the bustling restaurant floor. His posture was impeccably straight, holding the sleek black leather check presenter in his hand. He bypassed my parents completely and walked directly over to Trent. Even through the thick glass, I could read the body language perfectly. Trent was mid-sentence, probably bragging about some imaginary blockchain investment, when Elias stepped up to the table. Trent waved his hand dismissively, pointing toward the empty seat where I had been sitting just moments before. He was likely telling Elias that the bill was already handled by the woman who just left. But Elias simply shook his head and placed the leather folder squarely on the table, right next to Trent's cocktail. Trent picked up the folder with an irritated huff. He flipped it open. I watched the exact second his inflated ego collided with reality. His smug expression vanished, replaced by a sudden rigid panic. The total was over $4,000. It included the premium steaks, the imported caviar, the vintage bourbon he had so proudly ordered, and the massive minimum spend required for that specific dining alcove. Trent looked up, his eyes frantically scanning the restaurant for me. Jasmine noticed his panic. She leaned over and snatched the receipt from his hand. Her mouth dropped open in an exaggerated gasp. I could almost hear the shrill pitch of her voice through the glass. Vivian and Desmond stopped their performative smiling. The illusion was unraveling in real time. Trent reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out his wallet. He retrieved a sleek, metallic credit card and handed it to Elias with a forced, confident smile. Elias took the card, swiped it on his handheld terminal, and waited. A moment later, he shook his head and handed the card back. Declined. Trent's face flushed a violent shade of crimson. He began arguing, gesturing wildly at the terminal, blaming a fraud alert or a bank error. He dug into his wallet again, pulling out a second card. He thrust it at Elias. Elias swiped it again. I watched the red light flash on the terminal, even from my distance. Declined again. The situation escalated quickly. Jasmine was frantically tapping on her phone, her face contorted in sheer terror. The facade of her luxurious lifestyle, the one she constantly flaunted on social media, was crumbling in the middle of the most exclusive dining room in the city. Desmond stood up, his chest puffing out as he tried to argue with the manager. He was pointing his finger, acting as if Elias had somehow made a mistake. But Elias maintained his cool professional composure, simply pointing to the bottom line of the receipt. The most satisfying part of the entire spectacle was watching the adjacent tables. My parents had deliberately chosen this restaurant and this specific time because several prominent elders from Zion Fellowship Megachurch were dining nearby. Vivian and Desmond based their entire self-worth on their standing in that church. They donated money they did not have just to sit in the VIP pews and attend exclusive pastoral dinners. Now those very same church elders were turning in their seats, openly staring at the commotion. Sister Beatrice, a woman known for spreading church gossip faster than a wildfire, had put her fork down entirely to watch. She was whispering to Brother Thomas, who was shaking his head in judgment. They were watching Trent yell at a service worker while Desmond frantically emptied his pockets, pulling out crumpled $20 bills that would not even cover the tax on the meal. Vivian sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Her perfect church lady image, the reputation she had sacrificed my college education to build, was completely obliterated. My phone lit up on the seat beside me, illuminating the dark cabin of the SUV. The screen displayed Jasmine's name. I watched it vibrate, listening to the low hum of the device against the leather. I did not answer. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. This time it was Vivian, then Trent, then Desmond. They were cycling through my phone, trying to summon me back to save them. When the calls went unanswered, the text messages began to flood in. I picked up the phone and watched the notifications stack up on my lock screen. "Where the hell did you go? Trent's cards are locked because of a fraud alert. Get back here right now and pay this." That was from Jasmine. A minute later, another message arrived. "Camille, I swear to God, if you do not come back here, the restaurant is threatening to call the police. You cannot do this to us." Then a message from Trent. "You think you are funny. You are going to pay for this, you bitter psycho. Get back here before I make a scene." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head at their sheer delusion. Even in the midst of their own financial ruin, they still felt entitled to demand my resources. They still believed they could command me like a disobedient child. They thought the same 19-year-old girl they had thrown out onto the streets of Atlanta was going to rush back in with her tail between her legs to bail them out. They were severely mistaken. I watched as restaurant security personnel began approaching their table. Elias was no longer smiling. He was giving them an ultimatum: pay the bill or deal with the authorities. Vivian was openly sobbing now, the humiliation absolute. A new notification popped up on my screen. It was a voicemail transcription from Vivian. I tapped it, reading the frantic, automated text as the system processed her words. "Camille, you have humiliated this family in front of the entire congregation. Brother Thomas is watching us right now. Your father is having palpitations. You walked out on your own blood over a simple joke. We are coming to your office tomorrow morning and you will pay for embarrassing us like this. You have gone too far this time." I locked my phone and tossed it into my designer handbag. The audacity of her threat did not frighten me. It excited me. They thought they could ambush me at my workplace. They thought they could intimidate me in my own domain. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with anymore. The scared girl they abandoned was dead. In her place was a woman who had built a fortress of wealth, power, and impenetrable boundaries. I opened my phone settings one last time and switched the device to Do Not Disturb, silencing the endless stream of panic. I looked at my driver through the rearview mirror. "Take me home, David," I said, leaning my head back against the plush headrest and closing my eyes. "I have an early morning tomorrow." As the SUV pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the city traffic, I felt a profound sense of peace. The streetlights washed over the interior of the car, casting warm shadows. The storm was just beginning, and I knew my family would unleash everything they had to try and drag me back down to their level. But I was ready. Let them come to my office tomorrow. Let them walk right into the trap. The morning light hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown headquarters, casting a sharp glow over the white marble floors and the sleek acoustic paneling of my office. My workspace was a physical manifestation of everything I had built from the ground up. The walls were lined with industry awards and framed features from top business magazines. By 9 o'clock, I was seated at my custom oak desk directly across from the executive board of a major international airline. We were in the final stages of negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract for their annual corporate retreat. The energy in the room was focused, professional, and entirely under my control. Then the screaming started. It pierced right through the heavy soundproof glass of my reception area. A shrill, unmistakable voice echoing down the pristine executive hallway. It was Jasmine. She was shrieking at my front desk staff, claiming a life-or-death family medical emergency. It was the only possible way she could have bypassed the strict lobby security downstairs. I saw my executive assistant jump up from her desk, trying to intercept the chaos, but it was too late. The heavy double doors to my private suite burst open before she could press the panic button under her desk. In stormed the trio of absolute disaster, Vivian, Jasmine, and Trent. They looked exactly like people who had spent the entire night spiraling in panic. Jasmine was wearing the same designer coat from the restaurant, her makeup noticeably smudged around her eyes. Vivian clutched her expensive handbag like a weapon, her jaw set tight with rigid fury. And Trent marched in with his chest puffed out, leading the pack as if he owned the entire high-rise building. My clients turned in their leather chairs, their expressions shifting from engaged professionalism to absolute bewilderment. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with my lead client. I simply raised a single manicured finger, silently asking them for a brief moment of patience. Trent did not care about professional boundaries or basic human decency. He marched straight past my clients and walked right up to my desk. He placed both of his hands flat on the polished wood surface and leaned over my workspace. It was a classic, transparent intimidation tactic. He was a chronically unemployed man trying to use his physical presence and sheer privilege to shrink a successful Black woman in her own domain. "You think you are so smart, Camille?" Trent spat out, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You think you can pull a stunt like that and just walk away without consequences? They humiliated us. I had to leave my vintage watch as collateral with the general manager just to get out of that restaurant without being arrested." Jasmine pushed her way forward, standing right beside her husband. "You locked my cards?" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my face. The bank flagged my accounts for suspected fraud because of the sudden massive charge attempt. I could not even buy my iced coffee this morning. My friends are texting me asking why we were detained at Lumiere. "You are going to fix this right now, or I am calling the police and pressing charges for theft." Vivian stepped up behind them, completing their solid wall of aggressive entitlement. "How dare you treat your own family like common criminals?" my mother demanded. She completely ignored the fact that there were 4 highly influential corporate executives sitting mere feet away watching this entire meltdown. "You embarrassed us in front of Brother Thomas and the senior church elders. You ruined our 40th anniversary. You are going to pay that restaurant bill today. You are going to issue a public apology, and you are going to beg for our forgiveness before I ruin your reputation in this city." I sat perfectly still in my chair. I let their frantic, chaotic energy crash against the absolute calm of my environment. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I just watched them unravel. Trent took my silence as submission. He stood up straighter, adjusting the lapels of his blazer with a smug, self-satisfied look. I have already spoken to my legal team. He lied smoothly, dropping words he barely understood. What you did constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress and financial sabotage, not to mention defamation of character in a public setting. If you do not wire the funds to cover that dinner immediately and compensate us for the damages to our reputation, I am dragging you into court. We will take this little party planning business of yours and strip it down to the studs. I looked at Trent. I really looked at him. A man who had not held a steady job in 5 years was standing in a building I owned, threatening to take a company I built with my own blood and sweat. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he actually believed he held all the power in this room. He thought he could walk into my empire and bully me into submission. I turned my attention slowly back to my clients. They were sitting in stunned silence, unsure if they should call building security or quietly step outside. I offered the executives a warm, apologetic smile. "Gentlemen, I am so incredibly sorry for this unexpected interruption," I said, my voice smooth and entirely unbothered by the shouting match that just occurred. "It appears I have a minor pest control issue that requires my immediate attention." I stood up from my desk and walked gracefully around the shouting trio. I gently guided the airline executives toward the open double doors. "My assistant will validate your parking and arrange for a private car to take you to your next destination," I told them softly. "Let us reschedule our final review for tomorrow morning over breakfast." My treat. The lead executive nodded quickly, clearly eager to escape the escalating hostility of my family. "We completely understand, Camille. We will see you tomorrow morning." They filed out of the office, casting nervous, cautious glances at Trent and Jasmine. As the last client crossed the threshold, my assistant looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Her hand was hovering over her desk phone, ready to call the police. I shook my head slightly, silently communicating for her to stand down and give us privacy. I grabbed the heavy oak doors of my office. I looked back at the 3 people standing in the middle of my workspace. They were waiting for me to panic. They were waiting for the 19-year-old college dropout they had thrown onto the street to finally break down and surrender to their demands. They were expecting tears and compliance. Instead, I pulled the doors shut. I reached out and turned the heavy metal deadbolt. A loud, sharp click echoed through the silent room. I turned around slowly, letting my eyes sweep over Vivian, Jasmine, and Trent. My face settled into a mask of deadly calm. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. I was no longer the prey cornered at a family dinner. They had confidently marched right into the cage, and I had just locked the door behind them. The sharp click of the heavy metal deadbolt echoed through the silent room. I turned around and leaned back against the solid oak doors, crossing my arms over my chest. I watched the 3 of them process the shift in the atmosphere. Trent swallowed hard. His broad shoulders dropped just a fraction. He was entirely accustomed to intimidating people in public spaces where social decorum and polite company forced his targets to back down. He relied on the fact that most professionals would do anything to avoid a scene. But we were completely alone now, in a soundproof executive suite, and social decorum had walked out the door with my clients. I did not raise my voice. I walked slowly back to my custom desk, the soft click of my heels sinking into the thick carpet. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out a heavy manila folder. I tossed it right into the center of my desk. The loud, heavy thud made Jasmine physically jump. "You want to talk about lawsuits, Trent?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Let us talk about legal discovery. Because if you drag me into a courtroom, every single piece of paper inside that folder becomes public record. I would absolutely love to see how your fragile ego handles a federal judge digging through your finances." I reached forward and flipped open the cover of the dossier. Trent's face tightened, but he stubbornly kept his chin raised, trying to project a dominance he did not actually possess. "I hired a private investigator to run a comprehensive background check on you last night," I said, tapping the top page. "Your prestigious blockchain consulting firm is a complete ghost town. You filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy exactly 24 months ago. You do not have a client roster. You do not have an investment portfolio. You do not even have a valid business license in this state anymore. You have a mountain of defaulted personal loans, a trail of failed crypto ventures, and a massive tax lien hanging over your head. Trent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The arrogant smirk was completely wiped from his face. His pale skin turned a sickly shade of gray as the reality of his exposure set in. He looked frantically at Jasmine, trying to gauge how much she actually knew about the ruin he had brought into their marriage. I turned my gaze to my sister. Jasmine was staring at the open folder with wide, terrified eyes. "And you, Jasmine?" I continued, my tone laced with absolute disgust. "You have been playing the wealthy socialite on the internet while your husband secretly drains every single credit card in your name. You post pictures of designer bags and luxury vacations, acting like you are the elite of Atlanta. But you cannot actually afford his debts, can you? You cannot even afford the lease on your own car." Jasmine crossed her arms, hugging herself defensively. "Shut up, Camille," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You do not know anything about my marriage." "I know everything," I fired back. "I know that because Trent is unemployable, you have been quietly siphoning money from Vivian and Desmond. You are bleeding our parents' retirement accounts dry just to keep up appearances at Zion Fellowship Megachurch. You are drowning in debt, and you expected to walk into Lumiere last night and force me to foot the bill for your fake lifestyle." Vivian gasped, clutching the collar of her expensive coat. She stepped squarely in front of Jasmine, positioning herself like a human shield to protect her golden child. "That is an absolute lie," Vivian spat, her voice shaking with a volatile mix of fear and outrage. "Trent is a brilliant businessman. They are just going through a temporary transition phase with his startups. You are making up vicious, malicious stories because you are jealous of your sister." I shook my head, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. "Jealous of what, Mom?" I asked, staring directly into her eyes. "Am I supposed to be jealous of a 30-year-old woman who still needs her parents to pay her utility bills while her husband plays pretend on the internet? Am I supposed to envy a marriage built on financial fraud and church gossip?" Vivian lost whatever shred of maternal composure she had left. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. The polished church-going facade completely melted away, revealing the bitter, enabling woman she truly was. "You have been bitter ever since we stopped paying your tuition!" Vivian screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her own guilt. "You have held a miserable grudge against this family ever since we cut off your college money to fund your sister. You never forgave us for prioritizing her potential over your useless degree, and now you are trying to destroy her marriage out of spite." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. She was actually weaponizing the exact moment she made her own daughter homeless. She felt absolutely no remorse for pulling my funding at Spelman College. She still believed that sacrificing my education and my safety to pay for Jasmine's failed pageant career was a justified parenting decision. "Look at what her potential bought you, Vivian," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "A fraud for a son-in-law and a pile of suffocating debt. You threw me onto the street to bet on a losing horse." That was the breaking point. Vivian lunged forward across the desk. She raised her hand and slapped me hard across the left side of my face. The sharp, stinging impact radiated across my cheekbone. The loud crack of the slap echoed shockingly through the pristine office. Jasmine gasped, stepping back, but Trent just crossed his arms, looking visibly relieved that my mother was taking the heat off of his financial crimes. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. I did not raise my hand to touch my cheek. I did not stumble. I slowly turned my head back to face my mother, my expression entirely unchanged. Vivian stood there, breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "You listen to me, you disrespectful, ungrateful child," Vivian hissed, pointing a trembling manicured finger inches from my face. "You think because you have a fancy office and a few corporate clients that you are better than us. You are nothing, you have no real family, and you will have no legacy." She leaned in closer, her eyes wide with a desperate manic energy. She thought she was about to deliver the ultimate crushing blow. "Desmond and I sat down last night after you humiliated us," Vivian declared, her voice dripping with venomous pride. "We completely updated our estate planning. Jasmine is inheriting the historic 5-bedroom house on Maple Drive. She gets the property, she gets the equity, and she gets our entire estate. We are leaving you with absolutely nothing, Camille. You will not get a single dime from us when we are gone." She stood up straight, adjusting her coat, waiting for me to break down. She expected me to cry over being formally cut out of the family legacy. She expected the threat of losing my childhood home to bring me to my knees. She thought she held the ultimate trump card. The sting radiated across my left cheekbone, a sharp burning sensation that flared hot beneath my skin. The sound of flesh striking flesh hung in the silent air of my locked office. Vivian stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes wide, with a manic mix of triumph and desperation. She had just delivered what she truly believed was a fatal blow. Not just the physical strike, but the grand declaration she had screamed moments before. She had proudly announced that she was completely cutting me out of the family legacy. She declared that Jasmine would inherit the historic 5-bedroom house on Maple Drive, leaving me with absolutely nothing. I let the silence stretch. I could taste a faint hint of copper where my teeth had caught the inside of my lower lip. Trent let out a breath he had been holding. Jasmine crossed her arms, stepping closer to our mother, as if they had just won a massive war. They were waiting for the 19-year-old girl they had thrown out onto the streets of Atlanta to resurface. They expected me to drop to my knees and beg for my share of the inheritance. They wanted me to cry over a house that had been the center of our family prestige for decades. They desperately needed me to react with the same frantic energy they brought into my building. Instead, I slowly raised my hand and brushed my fingertips against my stinging cheek. I looked at Vivian and I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was a cold, calculated, and deeply knowing smile. I saw the exact moment the triumph behind Vivian's eyes fractured into confusion. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward, her expensive coat shifting around her shoulders. "Is that all you have, Vivian?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You march into my corporate headquarters, bypass my security, interrupt my business negotiations with international clients, and physically assault me just to tell me you are leaving a house to Jasmine. A house you actually think constitutes a legacy." Vivian faltered. She glanced at Trent, who suddenly looked very unsure of his position. "You are completely unhinged," Vivian stammered, trying to regain her footing and maintain her righteous church lady persona. "You think you can just smile at me after I formally cut you out of this family? You are going to die with nothing, Camille. You are going to watch your sister thrive while you wither away in your own bitterness." I did not entertain her delusion for another second. I turned my back on them entirely, stripping them of the attention they so desperately craved. I walked over to my desk, picked up my sleek landline phone, and pressed the speed dial button for building security. "Marcus, this is Camille," I said calmly into the receiver, keeping my eyes fixed on the Atlanta skyline outside my window. "I have 3 trespassers in my private executive suite who have become physically violent. I need a full security escort to remove them from the premises immediately. Do not let them stop at the reception desk and revoke any future building access under their names." As I placed the receiver back on the cradle, Jasmine lost whatever remaining composure she had. The reality that she was about to be escorted out of a luxury high-rise by uniformed guards like a common criminal broke right through her curated social media facade. "You are a miserable, bitter woman!" Jasmine screamed, taking an aggressive step toward my desk before stopping herself. "You can sit in this fancy office all you want, but you are still just the family disappointment. You are going to end up alone and broke because nobody wants a woman who puts money over her own blood. You have no husband, you have no legacy, and now you do not even have a childhood home to go back to. You have absolutely nothing, Camille." I leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing my ankles. I watched her project every single one of her own deepest insecurities directly onto me. She was a woman drowning in her husband's hidden debts, entirely reliant on our parents' retirement funds to keep up appearances at Zion Fellowship megachurch. Yet she had the nerve to stand in my multi-million-dollar headquarters and call me broke. Trent tried to salvage his bruised ego and step into the role of the protective husband. "Do not waste your breath on her, babe," he said, placing a hand on Jasmine's shoulder while eyeing the locked door nervously. "Her company will probably fold by next quarter anyway. Once the church elders hear how she assaulted her own mother today, her catering contracts in this city will dry up overnight. Let us go before she tries to play the victim. A heavy, loud knock sounded at the double doors. I reached under my desk and pressed the remote unlock button. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing Marcus, my head of security. He was flanked by 3 tall, imposing guards in tailored dark suits. They stepped into the office, moving with coordinated, intimidating precision. "Ma'am," Marcus said, addressing Vivian with cold professional authority, "we need you to step away from the desk and move toward the elevators immediately. If you resist, we will bypass local police and involve federal authorities for corporate trespassing and assault." Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer size of the security team silenced her. She grabbed her designer handbag, her face flushed with a bright, humiliating red. Jasmine grabbed Trent's arm, pulling him toward the door. They were forced to march out of my private suite past my horrified front desk staff and down the long, illuminated hallway. I stood in the doorway of my office watching them. Vivian tried to maintain her dignified posture, but she was practically being herded like cattle. Jasmine kept her head down, hiding her face from the other corporate employees who were stepping out of their offices to witness the commotion. Trent walked stiffly, his jaw clenched in silent, impotent rage. I waited until they were loaded into the private elevator. I watched the stainless steel doors slide shut, cutting off their furious, panicked faces. The moment the digital floor indicator began ticking downward, my posture shifted. The calm, amused mask I had worn for their benefit dropped away, revealing a sharp, predatory focus. The game was no longer about defending myself. It was about dismantling their entire reality. I walked back to my desk and picked up my personal cell phone. I bypassed my assistant and dialed a direct private number. The line rang twice before she answered. "Tasha, it is Camille." My corporate attorney and fiercely loyal best friend recognized the tone of my voice instantly. We had known each other since our early 20s, and she had been instrumental in helping me build the legal framework of my catering empire. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice shifting straight into battle mode. "Cancel your afternoon meetings and get over to my penthouse," I instructed, pacing behind my desk. "Bring your encrypted laptop." Vivian just marched into my office with Jasmine and Trent. She threatened to cut me out of the family legacy. She loudly declared that she is leaving the historic 5-bedroom house on Maple Drive entirely to Jasmine. Tasha let out a sharp, humored laugh over the receiver. The sound was rich with absolute disbelief. She threatened to give away a house she does not even own. "Exactly," I replied, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. Vivian actually thinks she has the power to leave that property to Jasmine. She thinks she holds the deed. I need you to pull the property files, the limited liability company registration, and all the financial records attached to the Maple Drive house. I want every single piece of paper pulled and verified by the time I get home this evening. We are going to audit my family. I left the office early that evening. My driver brought me straight back to my penthouse, which occupied the entire top floor of a luxury high-rise in Midtown. The space was completely my own, featuring dark hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, and a massive marble kitchen island where I did my best thinking. It was a long way from the back seat of my old sedan. I had barely poured myself a glass of red wine when the private elevator chimed. Tasha stepped into the foyer carrying a thick leather briefcase and an expression that meant absolute business. Tasha and I had met during our early 20s when we were both clawing our way to the top of our respective fields. Now she was one of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in the city and fiercely protective of my empire. She dropped her briefcase right onto the marble island and pulled out her encrypted laptop. "Tell me everything," she commanded, sliding onto a bar stool. "I want to know exactly what Vivian said before I pull up these deeds." I took a slow sip of my wine. She stood in my office and proudly declared that I was cut out of the family legacy. She looked me dead in the eye and said she was leaving the Maple Drive house entirely to Jasmine. She thinks she holds the ultimate trump card to ruin my life. Tasha let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head as her fingers flew across the keyboard. "The sheer delusion of that woman," she muttered, logging into the secure real estate database. "She is threatening to evict you from your own property." That was the reality my family was completely oblivious to. 4 years ago, my father Desmond was drowning. He had made a series of terrible financial decisions trying to keep up appearances with the elite members of Zion Fellowship megachurch. He took out bad loans to fund lavish church donations and pay for Jasmine luxury car leases. The bank was 30 days away from foreclosing on the historic 5-bedroom house on Maple Drive. It was the house I grew up in and the absolute center of my parents' social pride. Losing it would have destroyed their standing in the community. Despite everything they had done to me, despite throwing me out when I was 19, I could not stomach the thought of my parents being thrown onto the street. But I also knew Desmond possessed a fragile, toxic pride. He would rather go bankrupt than accept charity from the daughter he had deemed a failure. So I used my wealth quietly. I had Tasha set up an anonymous limited liability company. We bought the debt directly from the bank, paid off the massive arrears in full, and legally purchased the property. We structured the paperwork through a maze of corporate entities, so it looked like an angel investor or a miraculous loan modification had saved them. My parents were allowed to continue living in the house completely rent-free. I paid the property taxes. I paid the home insurance. I maintained the roof over their heads for 4 years while they sat in church every Sunday and bragged about how God had blessed their finances. They had no earthly idea that their savior was the exact same woman they loved to humiliate. And now Vivian wanted to use my own house as a weapon against me. "I have the original deed right here," Tasha said, turning her laptop screen toward me. "The limited liability company is listed as the sole owner. You are the sole managing member of that company. Desmond and Vivian are legally classified as month-to-month tenants with 0 equity and 0 ownership rights. Jasmine cannot inherit a single brick of that house." I smiled, staring at the digital document that proved my absolute control over their reality. "They really believe they have secured Jasmine's financial future," I said. "Trent is bankrupt and Jasmine is drowning in debt. They are counting on the equity in that house to bail them out. When they find out they do not own it, the fallout is going to be spectacular." Tasha nodded, her eyes scanning the multiple tabs she had opened on her screen. She was pulling the public financial records linked to the property address and cross-referencing them with the credit reports we legally had access to as the property owners. I watched her face as she read through the digital files. Tasha was usually unflappable, a woman who handled multi-million-dollar corporate mergers without breaking a sweat. But suddenly her fingers stopped typing. Her posture went completely rigid. The victorious energy in the room evaporated instantly, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. Tasha leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing as she highlighted a specific line of text in the banking records. She read it once. She read it twice. "What is it?" I asked, setting my wine glass down on the marble counter. Tasha looked up at me. Her expression was deadly serious, devoid of any humor. "Camille," she said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent pitch, "look at this $150,000 anomaly on the title." Tasha turned her laptop so I could clearly see the screen. Her finger traced a line on the digital property ledger. Right there, nestled under the most recent municipal filings, was a home equity line of credit. It was a massive loan taken out against the value of the property for exactly $150,000. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my mind instantly shifted into analytical mode. "How is that even possible?" I asked, leaning over the marble island. "The limited liability company owns that property outright. Desmond and Vivian do not have the legal authorization to borrow against the equity. They are legally classified as tenants." Tasha's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the digitized loan origination documents from the county clerk portal. "Because they do not know about the LLC," she explained, her eyes darting across the dense legal jargon. "Vivian and Desmond think you just quietly co-signed a loan to save them from foreclosure 4 years ago. They think their names are still the primary ones on the deed and that you are just a silent guarantor." She clicked on the final page of the loan agreement and magnified the scanned image. There at the bottom of the document was my name. But it was not my handwriting. The loops were too dramatic and the slant was completely wrong. It was a sloppy, desperate forgery. "Jasmine," I whispered, staring at the fake signature. Tasha nodded grimly. "Jasmine and Vivian. They likely went to a predatory private lender who did not run a thorough commercial title search on the holding company. They forged your signature as the supposed co-signer to approve the equity line. They literally stole $150,000 of equity out of a house you own, Camille. This is not just a family dispute, this is massive bank fraud. I told Tasha to trace where the funds were dispersed. She hacked into the cross-referenced accounts we had monitored for the property tax maintenance. The breakdown of the stolen money was absolutely sickening. $30,000 went immediately to settle a high-interest debt collection agency that was coming after Trent. $50,000 was wired to Trent failing cryptocurrency trading account to cover his massive losses. The rest was completely blown on Jasmine. Tasha found the charges for her imported luxury car lease, her designer clothing hauls, and her expensive salon treatments. They committed a federal crime so Trent could play venture capitalist and Jasmine could buy purses. The sheer audacity of it burned in my chest. Vivian had literally slapped me in my office a few hours ago, proudly declaring she was leaving that house to Jasmine. She was standing in my corporate headquarters threatening me while actively knowing she had forged my name to steal from a property I paid for. She used my money to bail out the same white man who had sneered at me in a luxury restaurant last night, telling me I did not understand how wealth generation worked. The betrayal was so deep it bypassed hurt and went straight into absolute cold rage. Before I could even fully process the magnitude of the bank fraud, my personal cell phone lit up on the counter. It was not a text message. It was a Google alert I had set up years ago for my company name. Then another alert chimed. Then an Instagram notification. Then a flood of notifications across every social media platform I had installed. Jasmine had gone completely scorched earth. I picked up the phone. My sister had uploaded a heavily edited, tearful 10-minute video across all her public profiles. I tapped the video. There was my 30-year-old sister sitting in her luxury leased SUV, wearing the designer clothes she bought with my stolen equity, crying, without producing a single actual tear. She was staring into the camera, putting on the performance of a lifetime. She claimed that her older sister, the wealthy corporate event planner, had violently attacked her and our mother in an office earlier today. She spun a wildly fabricated story about how I locked them in a room and threatened them with physical violence. She claimed Trent bravely stepped in to protect his mother-in-law and that I called armed security to brutalize him. She called me a narcissistic, abusive woman who hated our parents because I was jealous of her happy marriage. But the lies did not stop there. She cried to her audience about how I was using expensive corporate lawyers and legal loopholes to try and bankrupt Vivian and Desmond. She claimed I was trying to steal our historic childhood home out from under them to sell it to developers. The most infuriating part was the link she posted in the caption. I clicked it and was redirected to a fundraising platform. Jasmine had launched a GoFundMe campaign titled "Save Our Elderly Parents from Corporate Greed." She was asking her thousands of followers and the entire congregation of Zion Fellowship Megachurch to donate money to help them hire a defense attorney to fight my supposed hostile takeover of their home. Tasha's phone buzzed next. She looked down and let out a sharp, furious breath. "Camille, it is worse," she said, holding up her screen. "Jasmine just tagged Atlanta Black Lifestyle magazine. She pitched them an exclusive interview. She is framing this as a story about corporate greed destroying a hard-working Black family. She is trying to get you canceled. She wants to ruin your catering contracts by painting you as a monster to the public." Tasha slammed her laptop shut, her lawyer instincts fully activated. "That is it," she declared, standing up from the bar stool. "I am drafting a cease and desist letter right now. We are slapping her with a massive defamation lawsuit by tomorrow morning. I will contact the fundraising platform and have that campaign ripped down for terms of service violations before she sees a single dime. I am going to bury her, Camille." I looked at the fundraising page on my phone screen. The donation counter was already ticking upward. People from their megachurch were pouring money into the campaign. $50 here, $100 there. The total had already crossed $2,000 in less than an hour. The congregation was eagerly donating their hard-earned money, completely unaware that their beloved pastor family was using them to fund a lifestyle built on fraud. My mind raced, connecting the legal dots faster than the anger could cloud my judgment. Jasmine had just initiated a public fundraising campaign based entirely on a fabricated story. She was soliciting donations under completely false pretenses, and because the platform processed payments across state lines, she was escalating her local bank forgery into something much more dangerous. She was actively committing federal wire fraud. Tasha was pacing my kitchen, already dictating legal threats into her phone recording app, mapping out the exact statutes we were going to hit them with. "Tasha," I said, my voice incredibly calm. She stopped and looked at me, waiting for the green light to destroy my sister. "Do you want me to issue the cease and desist right now?" Tasha asked, her finger hovering over her screen, ready to send the email. I looked down at the donation counter ticking up again, as another church member sent $50 to save Vivian and Desmond. I smiled, feeling a deep, dark satisfaction settling into my bones. The trap they had built for me was actually closing around their own necks. "No," I said, looking back at my fierce best friend. "Let her collect the money." Tasha understood my strategy the second the words left my mouth. Her posture relaxed and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face, matching my own. As a corporate attorney, she knew exactly how the law worked regarding online fundraising. If we issued a cease and desist right now, Jasmine would simply take the campaign down, claim she was being silenced, and walk away playing the victim. But by allowing the campaign to remain active, we were letting her dig her own grave. Jasmine was not just lying on the internet for sympathy, she was soliciting financial donations using a completely fabricated story about me stealing our parents' home. Because the fundraising platform processed payments across state lines, her little social media stunt automatically classified as federal wire fraud. Every single time a member of Zion Fellowship Megachurch clicked donate, they were adding another piece of evidence to a federal crime. Every dollar she collected under those false pretenses increased the severity of the charges she would eventually face. Over the next 48 hours, I maintained absolute radio silence. My public relations team called me, frantically begging me to release a statement to defend my character. Jasmine had managed to secure an interview with a prominent Atlanta Black lifestyle magazine, and she was painting a masterpiece of deception. She cried on camera, talking about how she and her white husband Trent were sacrificing their own financial stability to protect our elderly parents from my ruthless corporate greed. She framed herself as the loyal, devoted daughter fighting against a cold, heartless monster. The court of public opinion was heavily swayed. My business social media pages were flooded with angry comments from people who had never even met me. Church members left scathing reviews on my catering website, calling me a disgrace to my community. My public relations director sat in my office, pacing the floor, warning me that we were losing the narrative. I told her to sit down and do absolutely nothing. When an enemy is in the middle of making a massive mistake, you never interrupt them. Jasmine thought my silence was weakness. She thought I was hiding out of shame. She had no idea that my silence was a tactical maneuver designed to let her incriminate herself as publicly and permanently as possible. While Jasmine was busy performing for the cameras, Tasha and I were building an ironclad legal fortress. We transformed my penthouse kitchen island into a war room. We printed out every single bank statement, every property tax receipt, and every original document establishing my limited liability company as the sole owner of the Maple Drive house. We compiled the undeniable proof of the $150,000 forged equity line of credit. Tasha hired a forensic handwriting expert who confirmed within hours that my signature on the loan documents was a blatant forgery executed by someone trying to mimic my handwriting from an old college document. We also documented the digital footprint of the wire fraud. We took time-stamped screenshots of the fundraising campaign as the total climbed higher and higher. $10,000. $15,000. By the end of the second day, the campaign had crossed $20,000. Jasmine was posting update videos thanking the church community for their incredible generosity, promising that the funds were going straight to a legal defense team to save the family home. In reality, we knew she was likely transferring those funds directly into her personal checking account to cover the lease on her luxury vehicle and float Trent for another month. By Thursday evening, the legal binder was complete. It was 3 inches thick and contained enough hard evidence to send both Jasmine and Trent to federal prison, while simultaneously leaving Vivian and Desmond completely destitute. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse looking out over the glittering city skyline. I thought about the house on Maple Drive. I thought about the day I quietly bought the debt to save my parents from the humiliation of foreclosure. I had done it out of some lingering sense of duty, a foolish hope that maybe if I protected them they would finally see my value. But they had taken my protection, forged my name, stolen my equity, and then tried to destroy my reputation. The final thread of familial obligation I held onto snapped completely. Tasha walked over to the window holding a single sheet of heavy linen paper. It was the formal 30-day eviction notice. "We are ready, Camille," Tasha said, her voice quiet, but filled with absolute resolve. "This terminates their month-to-month tenancy. Because there is no formal lease agreement, they have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the sheriff arrives to forcibly remove them and their property from the house. Once you sign this, there is no going back. The war goes public." I turned away from the window and looked at the document. It was a simple legal form, but it carried the weight of my entire past. Signing it meant permanently evicting my own parents and the golden child sister they had sacrificed me to protect. It meant tearing down the facade they had built their entire lives around. I felt no hesitation. I felt no guilt. I reached out and took the custom fountain pen Tasha offered me. I pressed the gold nib to the signature line. Just as the ink touched the paper, a shrill, piercing alarm shattered the quiet atmosphere of the penthouse. I jumped, my hand jerking slightly on the paper. Tasha spun around looking for the source of the noise. The alarm was not coming from the building. It was coming from my personal cell phone resting on the marble kitchen island. It was the emergency alert tone for my company warehouse security system. I dropped the pen and rushed over to the island, snatching up the phone. The security application was flashing bright red on the screen, displaying a critical priority notification. "Motion detected in restricted zone. Loading dock." I tapped the notification immediately, pulling up the live high-definition video feed from the warehouse security cameras. The warehouse was located in an industrial district across town, a massive facility where we stored our high-end catering equipment, floral arrangements, and event staging materials. It was strictly off-limits to anyone without a secure access badge, and it was currently past 9 o'clock at night. The building should have been completely empty. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before the live feed snapped into crystal-clear focus. Tasha leaned over my shoulder, staring at the screen. Standing in the middle of my loading dock, pacing back and forth under the harsh glare of the motion-activated security lights, was Trent. He was alone. He was wearing a dark jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking nervously over his shoulder at the street. He had clearly bypassed the exterior gate by slipping in behind one of the late-night delivery trucks. He was pacing near the employee entrance, repeatedly checking his phone and kicking at a stray pebble on the concrete. "What is he doing there?" Tasha asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "How did he even know where the primary warehouse is located?" "Jasmine has access to my public business registry," I replied. My eyes locked on the screen, watching his erratic movements. "He is not there to steal equipment, Tasha. Look at his body language. He is not hiding his face. He wants to be seen. He is waiting for someone." "He is waiting for you," Tasha said, pulling out her own phone. "I am calling the police right now. This is criminal trespassing, and given his behavior in your office, he poses a legitimate physical threat." I reached out and placed my hand firmly over hers, stopping her from dialing. "No," I said, my mind calculating the angles faster than the panic could set in. "Do not call the police yet. Camille, he is a desperate man cornered by his own financial crimes." Tasha argued, her protective instincts flaring. "He is standing in an empty industrial park waiting to ambush you. You are not going down there." I looked at the live feed. Trent pulled his hand out of his pocket and ran it nervously through his hair. He looked exactly like a man who realized the walls were closing in. He knew the restaurant stunt had failed. He likely suspected that I was digging into the property records. He was there to intimidate me away from prying eyes, away from corporate security, where he thought he could use his physical presence and his sheer privilege to force a black woman into submission. Call my private driver, I instructed, stepping away from the island and walking straight toward the hall closet to grab my coat. Have him pull the car around to the private garage entrance. Tasha followed me, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. I am coming with you, she stated, leaving absolutely no room for debate. I pulled my dark wool coat over my shoulders and turned to face her. No, you are not. If a corporate attorney shows up, he will clam up immediately. He wants to corner me alone. He thinks I am vulnerable without my security team. I am going to give him exactly what he wants. I picked up my phone and enlarged the video feed showing Trent aggressively kicking a shipping crate. He wants to play the intimidating savior for my sister, I said, opening the penthouse door. I am going to let him dig the grave so deep neither of them will ever climb out. My driver pulled up to the gated entrance of my commercial catering warehouse just before 10 o'clock. The massive corrugated steel building sat quietly under the dark sky, nestled deep in the city industrial district. I instructed my driver to park the SUV completely out of sight, down a narrow service alley, and wait for my signal. I wanted Trent to believe I had arrived completely alone and vulnerable. I swiped my secure access fob and slipped through the side employee door. The warehouse was cavernous and impeccably organized. Towering racks of stainless steel prep stations, crystal glassware wrapped in protective foam, and massive pallets of luxury event staging equipment stretched out into the shadows. The only illumination came from the harsh, stark beams of the motion sensor lights near the loading docks. I walked with deliberate, heavy footsteps, letting the sharp click of my designer heels echo intentionally through the vast concrete space. I wanted him to hear me coming. I wanted to trigger the exact arrogant anticipation he had been building up while pacing in the cold. Trent was standing near the edge of the primary loading bay, kicking aggressively at a wooden shipping crate. When the sound of my footsteps reached him, he spun around. He immediately puffed out his chest, rolling his shoulders back. He adopted the rigid, entitled posture of a man who firmly believed he ruled the world simply because of his demographics and his gender. He was a white man cornering a black woman in an empty building, and he was practically vibrating with the absolute certainty that his inherent privilege would force me to submit. "You actually showed up!" Trent sneered, his voice echoing aggressively off the high concrete walls. "I was starting to think you were going to hide in your fancy penthouse behind your lawyers." I stopped a few feet away from him, keeping my hands buried casually in the pockets of my dark wool coat. "I do not hide from men who file for bankruptcy, Trent," I replied, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly flat. "What exactly are you doing trespassing on my commercial property?" He ignored my question entirely. He took 2 heavy steps forward, deliberately closing the physical distance between us. He was trying to use his height and his bulk to dominate the space looming over me to trigger a fear response. He reached inside his expensive but outdated leather jacket and pulled out a thickly folded stack of legal papers. He slammed the documents down hard onto the nearest wooden staging crate, the smack of paper echoing loudly. "This is a non-disclosure agreement and a direct property transfer deed," Trent commanded, tapping the top page with violent emphasis. "You are going to sign it right now. It completely absolves Jasmine of whatever petty restaurant debt you are trying to pin on her, and it legally transfers the deed of the Maple Drive house directly to us. You are signing over the limited liability company tonight, Camille. No more hiding behind anonymous corporate entities. No more threatening my wife." I stared down at the documents and then looked slowly back up into his eyes. The sheer, unchecked audacity of his demand was staggering. He had illegally broken into my property to aggressively demand that I hand over a multi-million-dollar real estate asset just to cover up his own financial ruin. He actually believed he could bully me into signing away my wealth. I knew I needed to keep him talking. I needed him to feel so comfortable in his unearned power that he would hang himself with his own words. So I played the part. I let my shoulders drop just a fraction, softening my stance to mimic intimidation. "You are completely delusional, Trent. I said, intentionally letting my voice waver just the slightest bit to feign panic. You cannot just force me to hand over my real estate because you are broke. You and Jasmine took out a massive loan on a house you do not own. You committed a major crime. Trent took another aggressive step forward, forcing me to take a small, calculated step backward toward the concrete loading ramp. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. A nasty, triumphant grin spread across his face, fueled by the false belief that he had finally broken my spirit. "I am not asking you, Camille," he growled, his tone dripping with absolute condescension. "You think you are so untouchable because you found out about the home equity line of credit. Yeah, we forged your name. So what? We needed the cash to fund my new business venture, and you were not using the equity in that house for anything except a sick power trip over your parents. You owe this family." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the empty warehouse. He felt completely invincible. "Go ahead and cry to the authorities." Trent sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious confidence. "Tell them everything. The police will not care what a bitter college dropout has to say against me." I let my shoulders tremble just a fraction. I took another step back, letting my spine hit the cold metal of the loading bay door. I looked down at the documents on the crate, wrapping my arms around myself as if I were trying to physically shield my body from his aggression. I needed him to feel absolutely victorious. I needed him to believe that he had finally broken me down and forced me into a corner I could not escape. "Trent, you cannot do this," I said, letting my voice crack perfectly on the last word. "The bank will find out. How did you even get them to approve a $150,000 loan without me present? I am the sole owner of the holding company. You do not have the legal authority to borrow against my equity." Trent laughed. It was a loud, booming sound that bounced off the steel rafters of the empty warehouse. He was so drunk on his own perceived power that he could not resist the urge to brag. He stepped even closer, trapping me against the door. He was eager to explain exactly how smart he thought he was, reveling in the opportunity to talk down to a black woman who had vastly outperformed him in every single aspect of life. "You really think you are the only one who knows how to move paper around, Camille?" he mocked, leaning his weight against the wooden shipping crate. It was almost too easy. "Jasmine dug through some old boxes and found a financial aid form you signed before your parents cut you off. She spent 3 days practicing your signature at the kitchen table until it looked close enough. We found a private online lender who only cared about the property appraisal and did not look too closely at the corporate holding structure. We slapped your name on the guarantor line, and the money was wired to our accounts 48 hours later. You practically handed it to us by keeping the company anonymous. But the fundraising campaign," I stammered, keeping my eyes wide and perfectly fearful. "You are raising money from Vivian and Desmond church friends. You are collecting donations across state lines. That is federal fraud, Trent." He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively in the air. "Those people at Zion Fellowship Megachurch are gullible cash cows. They practically trip over themselves to hand us their money because they want to feel close to the pastor family. Vivian and Desmond have spent decades grooming that congregation to worship the ground Jasmine walks on. Jasmine turns on the waterworks for the camera, posts a sad video, and they immediately open their wallets. We already pulled $20,000, and we are going to use it to pay the retainer for a vicious defense lawyer to force you to sign this deed transfer." He picked up a pen from his pocket and threw it onto the documents. "You are entirely outmatched, Camille," he sneered, his upper lip curling in disgust. "You are just a glorified caterer. You do not have the resources or the pedigree to fight me. Sign the paper transferring the house to us, and maybe I will convince Jasmine to let you cater our next anniversary party. If you refuse, I will make sure Vivian destroys whatever reputation you have left in this city." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the forged legal documents sitting on the crate. I uncrossed my arms. I straightened my spine, lifting my chin. The trembling in my shoulders stopped completely. I let out a long, slow breath and allowed a genuine, radiant smile to spread across my face. Trent frowned, his thick brow furrowing as he watched my entire demeanor transform in the blink of an eye. The terrified woman he thought he had cornered vanished into thin air. You think something is funny? He demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its booming confidence. I think it is absolutely hilarious, I said, my voice returning to its normal, smooth, and commanding tone. I think it is hilarious that a man who proudly claims to be a tech entrepreneur does not recognize a commercial-grade surveillance system when he walks right into one. I raised my right hand and pointed a single manicured finger toward the upper corner of the loading dock directly behind Trent. Trent turned his head slowly, following my gesture. Nestled discreetly in the junction of the heavy steel support beams was a sleek black dome. A tiny solid red light blinked steadily in the dim industrial lighting. I had those installed last month, I explained casually, dusting off the sleeve of my wool coat. They are state-of-the-art, high-definition security cameras equipped with highly sensitive directional microphones. They pick up crystal-clear audio from over 50 feet away, and the best part, Trent, is that they are hardwired directly to a secure cloud server that my corporate attorney is currently monitoring live from my penthouse. Trent's face drained of all color. The arrogant, angry flush in his cheeks vanished completely, leaving behind a sickly pale white. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked back up at the blinking red light, his eyes wide with sudden paralyzing terror. You just confessed to conspiracy to commit bank fraud, forgery, and federal wire fraud, I said, stepping away from the loading bay door and moving back into the open space of my warehouse. You clearly outlined how you and Jasmine orchestrated the theft of $150,000. You explicitly admitted to forging my signature, and you gleefully admitted to scamming your own church congregation out of $20,000 while calling them gullible cash cows. I picked up the forged transfer documents from the crate and ripped them precisely in half, dropping the pieces onto the concrete floor. The local police might not care what a bitter college dropout has to say, I continued, my voice ringing with absolute finality. But I guarantee the federal authorities will be incredibly interested in a high-definition audio and video confession from the primary suspect. You just handed me the rope to hang you with. Trent stared at the shredded paper on the floor. Pure, unadulterated panic washed over his features. He realized in that exact moment that his unearned privilege could not save him from federal prison. He looked at the blinking red camera, then looked at the exit door. He did not say another word. He did not try to argue or threaten me or salvage his wounded pride. He turned on his heel and sprinted toward the employee exit. I watched him stumble over his own feet as he hit the doorway. He slammed the heavy metal door open and disappeared into the cold night air, fleeing like the absolute coward he was. I watched the heavy metal door slam shut behind him. The loud reverberation shook the loading bay, but it was nothing compared to the absolute silence that followed. I stood alone in the center of my warehouse, bathed in the harsh security lighting. I did not move for a long moment. I just breathed in the cool, industrial air, letting the magnitude of what had just happened settle into my bones. Trent had come to conquer, and he had run away like a frightened child. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was Tasha. I answered and put it on speaker. Her voice was practically singing with legal adrenaline. "Camille," she said, her keyboard clacking furiously in the background. "I have the entire file downloaded to 2 separate encrypted hard drives. The audio is pristine. He clearly states his intent to commit fraud. He admits to the forgery, and he incriminates Jasmine on the wire fraud charge. It is a masterpiece." I told Tasha I was heading back to the penthouse. By the time my driver navigated the quiet city streets and pulled into my secure garage, my mind was already shifting to the next phase of the strategy. Trent was a coward, but he was a manipulative coward. I knew exactly what he was doing during the 20-minute drive back to my parents' house. He was spinning a narrative. He was building a defense out of pure fiction. When I stepped off my private elevator, Tasha was waiting in my kitchen, her laptop hooked up to my large living room monitor. We spent the next 45 minutes reviewing the footage. Seeing it on the big screen was even more satisfying. We watched his smug, arrogant face completely drop when I pointed out the camera. We were in the middle of discussing which federal agency to contact first when my phone lit up on the Marble Island. It was Vivian. I looked at Tasha. She immediately hit the record button on her legal dictation software. I swiped to answer and placed the phone on speaker, maximizing the volume. I did not even get the chance to say hello. Vivian's voice exploded through the speaker, a shrill, hysterical pitch that vibrated with self-righteous fury. "You are a monster, Camille," my mother screamed. "You are a sick, twisted monster, and you have completely lost your mind. How dare you trap your brother-in-law in a dark warehouse and threaten his life?" I leaned my hands on the marble counter, raising an eyebrow at Tasha. Trent had actually gone home and played the ultimate victim card. Trent just walked through the front door shaking. Vivian yelled, her breath hitching dramatically. "He told us how you lured him to that empty building. He told us how you had armed thugs waiting in the shadows to jump him. He said you tried to extort him for money and threatened to have him physically assaulted if he did not hand over his business assets to you. You are lucky he managed to escape before you had him killed." The sheer absurdity of the lie was breathtaking. He had weaponized his tears and his privilege perfectly, knowing that Vivian and Desmond would instantly believe a white man over their own black daughter. They needed to believe him because the alternative was admitting that the man funding their social status was a criminal. I did not interrupt her. I let her continue her frantic, delusional rant. "We know you are jealous of Jasmine's marriage," Vivian shouted, her voice echoing through my kitchen. "We know you are bitter because no man wants to deal with a cold, heartless woman who cares more about catering contracts than her own blood. But resorting to gang violence, you have brought the gutter right to our doorstep." "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady, "is that really the story Trent told you? Did he happen to mention a security camera?" "Do not try to spin this," Vivian snapped, cutting me off completely. "I do not want to hear your lies. You are trying to steal your sister's inheritance because your own life is empty, but it is not going to work. Desmond and I have been on the phone with the senior pastoral team at Zion Fellowship Megachurch." Tasha's eyes widened. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the counter. "We have scheduled an emergency meeting with the church elders for Sunday morning," Vivian declared, wielding her religious influence like a weapon of mass destruction. "We have told them everything about your aggressive behavior, your financial manipulation, and your unhinged jealousy. Brother Thomas and Pastor Jenkins are completely appalled. They are preparing a formal declaration of discipline." The threat hung in the air. For Vivian and Desmond, the megachurch was not just a place of worship, it was their entire social hierarchy. Being publicly disciplined or excommunicated from Zion Fellowship was the ultimate social death sentence in their community. They used the church to legitimize their false wealth, and now they were using it to try and force me into submission. "Here are your options," Vivian hissed, her tone dripping with toxic authority. "You are going to sign the deed of the Maple Drive house over to Jasmine by tomorrow afternoon. You are going to drop this ridiculous vendetta, and you are going to wire Trent a formal apology along with compensation for the emotional trauma you caused him tonight. If you refuse, we are going to stand at the pulpit this Sunday and officially excommunicate you from this family." She was breathing heavily into the receiver. "We will publicly shame you in front of 3,000 congregants," Vivian threatened. "We will tell the entire city that you are a violent, greedy disgrace. Your catering business will never secure another church contract or community event again. You will be dead to us, and you will be dead to this community. Choose very carefully, Camille, because family unity is not something you can buy your way back into." She finished her grand ultimatum, expecting me to crumble. She expected the threat of public humiliation to shatter my resolve. She thought the weight of the church and the fear of losing my reputation would force me to sign away my multi-million-dollar property to save my business. I looked at the television screen mounted on my living room wall. It was currently paused on a high-definition still frame of Trent staring in absolute terror at my warehouse security camera. The evidence of his felony crimes was completely undeniable. The evidence of the forged home equity line of credit was sitting in a neatly tabbed binder right next to my hand. The eviction notice was already drafted and waiting for a signature. I did not argue with her. I did not correct Trent's fabricated story about armed thugs. I did not beg for her understanding or try to explain that her golden son-in-law was a broke, desperate fraud. Explaining the truth to a woman who was committed to a lie was a massive waste of my time. I picked up the phone, bringing the receiver close to my mouth. "You are absolutely right, Vivian," I replied, my voice completely devoid of anger, fear, or hesitation. It was the smooth, polished tone of a corporate chief executive closing a very final deal. We all have choices to make, and actions definitely have consequences. There was a slight pause on the line. Vivian hesitated momentarily, confused by my absolute lack of panic. "So you will sign the deed transfer?" she asked, a sliver of greedy hope creeping into her voice. I smiled, looking directly at Tasha. "You will get exactly what you deserve on Sunday," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, chilling register. "Reserve a front row seat." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the marble counter. Tasha and I locked eyes. The battle lines were officially drawn, and the venue for their ultimate destruction had just been set by their own arrogance. Zion Fellowship Megachurch was a sprawling complex of glass and steel in the heart of Atlanta. It was the kind of institution that boasted a massive choir, a television broadcast setup, and a congregation of thousands of upwardly mobile Black professionals who heavily subscribed to the prosperity gospel. For Vivian and Desmond, the church was not a sanctuary for spiritual growth or community healing. It was a stage. It was the ultimate social battleground where they had spent decades curating the illusion of a flawless, wealthy, and highly blessed family. Desmond served on the elite board of deacons. Vivian practically ran the senior women ministry. Their entire identity and self-worth were tied directly to how the congregation perceived their financial and social standing. Today was supposed to be their crowning social achievement. Following the elaborate Sunday morning service, they had rented out the massive fellowship hall for a highly publicized reception. Jasmine and Trent had sent out glossy premium invitations to the entire church leadership, claiming they were celebrating Trent launching a groundbreaking new real estate investment venture. They had pulled out all the stops to impress the congregation. From what Tasha and I had gathered through our network, they had hired a premium catering company, set up a lavish buffet, and commissioned extravagant, towering floral centerpieces for every table. They were throwing a massive, expensive party to celebrate their own supposed wealth and brilliant business acumen. But I knew the exact source of that wealth. I knew the ugly criminal truth behind the celebration. Every single appetizer, every slice of cake, and every hour of the live jazz band playing in the corner was actively being funded by the $150,000 home equity line of credit they had stolen using my forged signature. They were literally standing in the house of the Lord, feasting on my stolen assets while accepting the praise, admiration, and prayers of their community. The sheer audacity of it burned in my chest, but I channeled that anger into absolute cold focus. I sat in the back of my private SUV, parked discreetly near the rear entrance of the fellowship hall. I smoothed my hands over the fabric of my tailored emerald green power suit. It was structured sharp and commanded absolute authority. Tasha sat beside me, her expression deadly serious, holding a thick black leather binder that contained every piece of explosive evidence we had compiled over the past few days. Standing just outside the vehicle, waiting patiently in the crisp Sunday morning air, were two uniformed county sheriff deputies. Tasha had legally arranged for them to be present on civil standby. It was a standard protocol when serving highly volatile eviction notices and confronting individuals with a documented history of aggressive behavior. But I also knew the profound psychological impact those badges would have on a room full of people obsessed with their public image. I gave Tasha a single nod. We stepped out of the SUV. The deputies fell into step right behind us, forming a highly visible protective escort. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors of the fellowship hall just as the reception was hitting its peak. The massive room was buzzing with the sound of hundreds of people laughing, talking, and celebrating. The jazz band was playing a smooth, upbeat tempo. I stepped onto the polished stone floor. Tasha flanked my right side and the armed deputies flanked my left. My heels struck the floor with a rhythmic, commanding click. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. It started near the entrance. The church members standing by the doors stopped talking mid-sentence. They saw the uniforms. Then they saw me. The sudden silence began rippling outward through the crowd like a heavy wave. People lowered their drinks. I saw Sister Beatrice, the church primary gossip, standing near a buffet table with her mouth hanging open. I saw Brother Thomas adjusting his glasses in pure shock. The sea of congregants instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path straight down the center aisle of the hall. The jazz band, noticing the sudden tense commotion in the crowd, faltered. The music slowly sputtered and died out, leaving an echoing, suffocating silence in the massive room. As I walked down that aisle, I felt the ghost of the 19-year-old girl who used to sit in these very pews. The girl who was told she was a failure, who was thrown out onto the street while this same congregation prayed for her sister's success. That girl was gone. I walked with the unshakable confidence of a woman who owned her own life, her own business, and quite literally the roof over her parents' heads. I kept my posture completely rigid, my eyes locked straight ahead. At the front of the room stood a raised stage, decorated with an enormous customized banner, congratulating Trent on his fake business launch. Jasmine was standing center stage in a stunning designer gown, holding a wireless microphone, soaking up the attention of her adoring audience. Trent stood right beside her, looking incredibly smug and self-satisfied. Vivian and Desmond were seated at a beautifully decorated round table directly in front of the stage, beaming with absolute pride. Desmond was the first to realize what was happening. He saw the sheriff deputies walking down the aisle, the color completely drained from his face, and he gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned gray. Jasmine followed his gaze. She saw me. The wireless microphone slipped from her hand and hit the stage floor with a loud, piercing feedback screech that made half the room cover their ears. Trent physically stumbled backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the side exit doors. He looked exactly like a trapped animal, but Vivian went straight into survival mode. She saw me walking down the aisle, flanked by law enforcement, and her toxic instinct to control the narrative immediately overrode her logic. She pushed her chair back violently and rushed up the short flight of stairs onto the stage. She snatched the microphone off the floor, her hands trembling with defensive rage. Her voice boomed through the massive speakers vibrating across the dead silent hall. "Camille," she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at me. "How dare you bring police into this sacred space? You are a bitter, jealous woman who cannot stand to see your sister thrive. You are trying to ruin a holy celebration because your own life is empty. I demand you turn around and walk out those doors right now before you embarrass yourself any further." She thought she could use the audience to intimidate me into backing down. She thought the pressure of 3,000 staring eyes would make me shrink. But I did not stop walking. I climbed the steps of the stage, my presence forcing Trent to back away into the curtain. I looked my mother dead in the eye and stepped right into her personal space. I did not argue. I reached out and wrapped my hand firmly around the microphone. I gripped the cool metal of the microphone, pulling it smoothly from her trembling fingers. Vivian tried to hold on, but her hands were shaking so badly she had no strength left to fight me. She took a stumbling step backward, her eyes wide with a sudden terrifying realization. She had always controlled the narrative in this building, but the power had just shifted permanently. I did not look at her. I turned my back on my mother and faced the 3,000 people sitting in the massive fellowship hall. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming through the overhead vents. "Good afternoon, Zion Fellowship," I said, my voice projecting clear and steady through the state-of-the-art sound system. "I am Camille. I am the daughter who was thrown out of this very community 14 years ago because my parents decided I did not fit their perfect narrative. I am also the woman you have been reading about on social media for the past 48 hours. I am the supposed corporate monster who is violently trying to steal my parents' home and bankrupt my own family." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People were exchanging nervous glances. "I know Jasmine has been collecting your generous donations," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I know she has been standing on stages just like this one crying about how Trent is sacrificing his own business capital to save our parents from my greed. But the truth is not something you can manufacture on the internet. The truth requires receipts." I looked over at the elevated sound and lighting booth in the back of the hall. I had sent my own lead audiovisual director ahead of me this morning. He was an expert who handled tech for massive corporate galas, and he had easily intercepted the church media system. I gave him a subtle, sharp nod. The massive digital screens behind the stage, the ones that were currently displaying a ridiculously oversized portrait of Trent and Jasmine, flickered and went completely black. A collective gasp echoed through the room. A second later, the screens lit up again with blazing high-definition clarity. They did not show family photos. They showed legal documents. I directed the congregation attention to the screens behind me. What you are looking at is the official bank foreclosure notice for the historic house on Maple Drive. I explained, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Look closely at the date. This was issued exactly 4 years ago. Desmond and Vivian were drowning in debt from bad loans and lifestyle expenses they could not afford. The bank was exactly 30 days away from throwing them out onto the street. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. I saw church elders leaning forward, squinting at the massive screens, reading the undeniable legal proof of my parents' financial ruin. The screens transitioned smoothly to the next set of documents. This is the anonymous limited liability company I established 4 years ago, I told the crowd. I bought the debt directly from the bank. I paid off the massive arrears in full, and I legally purchased the property to save them from public humiliation. For 4 years, I have paid the property taxes. I have paid the home insurance. I kept the roof over their heads completely rent-free while they stood at this very pulpit and bragged about how God was blessing Trent and Jasmine. They are nothing but month-to-month tenants on my property. Jasmine could not take it. Her carefully constructed reality was being shredded in front of the only audience she actually cared about. She lunged forward, her heavy designer gown swishing violently around her ankles. She was crying real panicked tears now, her makeup running down her face. "She is lying!" Jasmine screamed at the top of her lungs, waving her arms frantically toward the church elders. "Do not look at those screens. She fabricated all of those documents to ruin Trent business launch today. She is an abusive, jealous liar. We own that house. She is just trying to destroy us because she is miserable and alone." I did not argue with her. Arguing with delusion is a waste of breath. I simply looked back at my technical director in the booth and gave another nod. The screens shifted again. This time it was not a static document. It was a video. It was the crystal clear 4K night vision footage from my commercial warehouse. The lighting on the screen was harsh and stark. The audio was pristine, completely free of background noise. Trent's face appeared 50 feet wide on the megachurch screens. His booming, arrogant voice echoed out of the massive speakers, filling every single corner of the fellowship hall. I let the congregation watch as he aggressively cornered me against the loading dock doors. I let them listen as he proudly bragged about the forgery. "It was almost too easy," Trent's voice boomed from the speakers, vibrating through the floorboards. "Jasmine dug through some old boxes and found a financial aid form you signed. She spent 3 days practicing your signature at the kitchen table until it looked close enough. We slapped your name on the guarantor line and the money was wired to our accounts." The entire church gasped in unison. The sound was deafening. Vivian covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud, wailing sob. Desmond sank into his chair, looking physically ill, but the video was not over. I let it play right up to the most damning moment. The congregation watched Trent sneer on screen. They heard him explain exactly how he funded his new business venture by stealing $150,000 of my equity. And then they heard him talk about them. "Those people at Zion Fellowship Megachurch are gullible cash cows," Trent's voice echoed mockingly through the sanctuary. "They practically trip over themselves to hand us their money because they want to feel close to the pastor family." Jasmine turns on the waterworks for the camera, posts a sad video, and they immediately open their wallets. "We already pulled $20,000, and we are going to use it to pay a vicious defense lawyer." I signaled for the video to cut. The screens faded to black, leaving the fellowship hall in absolute stunned, horrified silence. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The profound betrayal registered on thousands of faces simultaneously. These people had donated their hard-earned money. They had prayed for my sister. They had welcomed this white man into their sacred space and treated him like family, and he had just looked at a camera and called them gullible cash cows. "Sister Beatrice, The woman who had been staring at me in the restaurant let out a loud, indignant shout, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. Brother Thomas stood up, his face dark with furious, righteous anger. The senior church elders who had just been shaking Trent hand minutes prior were looking at the stage with pure, unadulterated disgust. The illusion of the Golden family was entirely and permanently shattered. Trent realized in that exact moment that his white savior complex could not protect him in a room full of betrayed and furious African-American churchgoers. The physical posture of dominance he had relied on his entire life completely evaporated. He looked at the blank screens, then looked out at the furious mob he had just insulted. He began physically backing away. He was shuffling backward toward the heavy velvet curtains at the edge of the stage, trying to find the side exit. He wanted to slip out the back door and disappear before the congregation could demand their money back. But the crowd was standing up, raising their voices, demanding answers. The two uniformed sheriff deputies who had been standing quietly at the bottom of the stage stairs stepped forward. They moved with swift, tactical precision, blocking the side exit path entirely. Their hands rested casually on their duty belts, sending a very clear message that nobody was leaving this stage. Trent panicked. He was completely cornered with nowhere to run. He did what arrogant cowards always do when the consequences of their actions finally catch up to them. He turned on the closest person to save his own skin. He stopped backing away and pointed a shaking finger directly at his wife. "It was all her idea," Trent screamed over the rising noise of the fellowship hall, completely throwing Jasmine under the bus. "She is the one who forged the signature. She made me go along with the loan. She set up the fundraising account. I did not do anything wrong. It was all Jasmine." Jasmine stared at her husband in absolute horror. The man she had defended and stolen for had just discarded her the second his own freedom was threatened. The perfect luxury marriage she constantly bragged about on social media evaporated into nothing but a cowardly betrayal on a church stage. I watched the devastating realization wash over my sister, but I did not feel an ounce of pity. I simply reached out and took the microphone back, bringing it close to my mouth to deliver the final killing blow. "There is no honor among thieves," I said, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the fellowship hall, causing the room to quiet down once again. "But pointing fingers will not save either of you today. The federal government does not care whose idea it was when both of your names are attached to the stolen funds." I stepped aside and Tasha walked forward. She looked absolutely flawless in her tailored navy suit, carrying the thick black leather binder that held the culmination of our entire legal strategy. She did not look at my parents. She walked directly up to Jasmine and Trent, stopping just a few feet away from them. Tasha opened the binder and pulled out a crisp, heavy sheet of linen paper. She held it out, offering it to Jasmine. Jasmine's hands were shaking so violently she could not even raise her arms to take it. Tasha simply let the document flutter down, landing perfectly at Jasmine's feet on the polished wooden stage floor. "That is a formal 30-day eviction notice," Tasha announced, her voice carrying the sharp, clinical precision of a corporate attorney executing a flawless takedown. "Because there is no formal lease agreement tied to the limited liability company, you and your parents are legally classified as month-to-month tenants. Your tenancy is officially terminated. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the property on Maple Drive. If you are not out by the deadline, the county sheriff will arrive to physically remove you and all of your belongings from the premises. You are losing the house you thought you were inheriting." Desmond let out a choked, agonizing sound from his seat at the round table. He dropped his head into his hands, realizing that the home he had used to project his wealth and status to this congregation was completely gone. His pride had cost him his sanctuary. But Tasha and I were not finished. We were not just taking the house. We were dismantling their entire fraudulent existence. "As for the money you stole," I continued, taking back the narrative and speaking directly to Trent. "You actually thought you could bypass the law because you consider yourselves untouchable. But bank fraud is not a minor offense, Trent. It is a federal crime. And as of yesterday morning, my legal team officially handed over the entire unedited security footage, the forged loan origination documents, and your complete financial records to the primary fraud investigation department at your lender." Trent stumbled backward, shaking his head in frantic denial. "You cannot do that," he stammered. "We are family. You cannot send us to prison over a family dispute. You stopped being family the night you told me I did not contribute a single penny to the table." I fired back my words, hitting him like physical strikes. "You stopped being family when you threatened me in my own warehouse. And it is not just the bank you have to worry about, Trent." I turned my attention to the congregation, specifically addressing the church members who had been swindled by my sister's social media lies. I knew how hard these people worked for their money, and how much faith they placed in church leadership. "I know many of you in this room donated your hard-earned money to a fundraising campaign over the past 2 days," I said, projecting my voice to reach the very back rows. "Jasmine told you she needed donations to save her elderly parents from my corporate greed. She collected over $20,000 from this generous community. But I need you all to understand exactly what she did. By creating a fabricated story to solicit financial donations across state lines, using an online payment platform, Jasmine committed federal wire fraud." The collective outrage in the room spiked again. Angry voices rose from the crowd, demanding accountability. Sister Beatrice, the woman who had judged me so harshly at the restaurant, was now pointing a furious finger at the stage. People were pulling out their phones, realizing they had been actively scammed by the very family that stood at the pulpit every Sunday, demanding their respect and their tithes. "We have documented every single donation," I explained, ensuring the congregation knew we were protecting them. "We have already contacted the fundraising platform and reported the campaign for criminal violation of their terms of service. The funds are being frozen, and the Platform Fraud Division is working with law enforcement to process full refunds to every single person who was deceived. You will get your money back. But Jasmine and Trent are going to face the federal consequences of stealing it." Jasmine collapsed to her knees right there on the stage. Her heavy designer dress pooled around her in a ruined, wrinkled mess. She was sobbing hysterically, burying her face in her hands. The glamorous, wealthy influencer persona was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, desperate fraud who finally realized she was entirely out of moves. Vivian could not process the magnitude of the destruction. Her mind simply could not handle the reality that her golden child was facing federal prison. Her son-in-law was a cowardly criminal, and her elite social standing was permanently obliterated in front of the exact people she spent decades trying to impress. She stood up from her chair, her mouth opening to say something, to try and formulate one last desperate defense. But no words came out. Vivian's eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled beneath her and she collapsed, completely losing consciousness. She fainted, falling heavily backward right into Desmond's arms. He shouted for help, struggling to support her dead weight as he lowered her gently to the floor. Several church nurses rushed forward from the front pews to attend to her, but the rest of the congregation simply watched the empire crumble. I stood on the stage, looking down at the absolute wreckage of my family. I felt a profound, undeniable sense of closure. The 19-year-old girl who had cried in her car all those years ago was finally and completely vindicated. I had not destroyed them. I had simply held up a mirror and forced them to look at their own reflections. I let their own greed, their own arrogance, and their own criminal entitlement do all the heavy lifting. I turned to Tasha, handing her the microphone. We walked together down the stairs of the stage, leaving the chaos behind us. As we reached the polished stone floor of the fellowship hall, the two uniformed sheriff deputies stepped forward purposefully. They bypassed me completely, their hands resting on their duty belts as they marched straight up the stairs toward the stage. They did not look at the fainting woman or the disgraced father. They walked directly up to Jasmine, who was still sobbing on the floor, and Trent, who was backed completely into the corner. "Ma'am, sir," one of the deputies announced, his deep voice carrying easily over the commotion in the room. "We are going to need you both to step outside and come with us. The Financial Crimes Division has a few questions for you down at the precinct regarding a forged equity line of credit and an active wire fraud investigation. Do not make this any more difficult than it already is." The fallout from that Sunday morning was swift, brutal, and absolutely permanent. The moment the sheriff deputies escorted Jasmine and Trent out of the fellowship hall, the fragile illusion of their perfect marriage shattered completely. Trent did exactly what an arrogant coward always does when the money dries up and the consequences arrive. He packed his bags that very same night. By Monday morning, he had already filed for divorce, trying to legally distance himself from the mess he helped create. He abandoned my sister, taking whatever cash he had left, and fled back to his hometown in the Midwest. He actually thought running across state lines would protect him from the fallout. He was severely mistaken. Federal investigators do not care about state lines when prosecuting bank fraud and wire fraud. The authorities were already waiting for him when he pulled into his parents' driveway. Jasmine was left completely alone to face the absolute wreckage of her life. The federal authorities froze her bank accounts immediately. She was formally indicted on felony fraud charges for the forged home equity line of credit and the fraudulent fundraising campaign she ran on social media. Because she had publicly solicited donations under false pretenses, the court ordered her to pay massive financial restitution to the fundraising platform and the church members she had deceived. Her imported luxury car was repossessed. Her designer clothes and expensive jewelry were seized and liquidated to help cover her staggering legal debts. With no husband, no parental bailouts, and a felony record, Jasmine was forced to move into a tiny rundown one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The woman who used to brag about her elite social status and mock my catering business was now working a minimum wage retail job at a local strip mall just to keep her lights on and pay her court-ordered restitution. She spent her days folding clothes for minimum wage, completely stripped of the unearned privilege she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. Vivian and Desmond faced a destruction that was just as devastating, but entirely social and psychological. The 30-day eviction notice I had served them was legally ironclad. With their retirement accounts completely drained by Trent and Jasmine, they had absolutely no financial safety net left. They were forced to pack up decades of memories and vacate the historic 5-bedroom house on Maple Drive. The house that had been the center of their pride was locked and listed on the commercial real estate market by my holding company. My parents had to downsize to a small, cramped 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood they used to openly look down upon. But the loss of the house was nothing compared to the loss of their reputation. The congregation at Zion Fellowship Megachurch completely turned their backs on them. The church elders who had witnessed their epic public humiliation requested that Desmond step down from the board of deacons immediately. Vivian was politely asked to resign from her leadership role in the senior women ministry. They had spent their entire adult lives sacrificing their own daughter to build a flawless public image, and it was all obliterated in a single Sunday afternoon. They became the ultimate cautionary tale in their community social outcasts in the very building they used to rule. For several months, I enjoyed the absolute quiet that followed the storm. My business continued to scale massive new heights. The public relations nightmare Jasmine tried to create had completely backfired. Once the truth about the fraud became public knowledge, my catering empire actually saw a surge in elite corporate contracts. People respected a business owner who protected her assets with such ruthless precision. Then on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, my lobby concierge buzzed my penthouse intercom. He informed me that a special delivery had arrived. A few minutes later, I was standing at my marble kitchen island, staring down at a thick, heavy envelope. The return address was written in Vivian familiar, looping handwriting. I did not need to open it to know exactly what was inside. Tasha had warned me this might happen once the reality of their cramped condo and ruined reputation truly set in. It was a tearful, multi-page letter from my parents begging for my forgiveness. I could easily imagine the contents. They would be claiming that they had made terrible mistakes, but that blood is thicker than water. They would be asking for grace for financial help and for a chance to rebuild the family unity they had violently destroyed. They wanted the successful, wealthy daughter back, now that the golden child had tarnished their crown. I looked at the heavy parchment envelope resting on the cool marble counter. The sheer audacity required to send this letter was staggering. They had physically assaulted me in my own office. They had plotted to steal my property while looking me dead in the eye and telling me I was a bitter failure. They had allowed my sister and her husband to forge my name to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund a fake lifestyle. Yet they still believed that a few tears and a reminder of our shared DNA would magically erase decades of emotional abuse and financial neglect. They thought the phrase "blood is thicker than water" was a magic spell that could undo the damage. But I knew the actual history behind that saying. The full quote is that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose to make, the relationships we build on mutual respect and loyalty, are vastly stronger than the biological ties we happen to be born into. My parents had weaponized the water of the womb my entire life, using it to demand my resources while giving me absolutely nothing but trauma in return. I thought about Desmond sitting in his small condo, stripped of his deacon title, unable to brag to his friends about his brilliant son-in-law. I thought about Vivian walking into the grocery store, hoping she would not run into any of the church members she used to gossip with. They were living in a prison of their own making, trapped by the consequences of their own toxic pride. And now they were reaching out to the daughter they threw onto the streets of Atlanta, hoping I would reach down into the mud and pull them out. I picked up the thick envelope, feeling the weight of the pages inside. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional cord that tied me to their approval had been completely severed. I reached across the island and picked up my favorite gold fountain pen. I did not open the envelope. I did not read their excuses or their pleas for financial salvation. I simply clicked the pen open and wrote 3 large, clear words directly across the front of the pristine white paper. Return to sender. I walked out of my penthouse and handed the marked envelope directly back to my private concierge. He nodded silently, taking the letter away to be mailed back to the cramped condo. That simple action was the final closing bracket on the darkest chapter of my life. I stepped onto my private elevator and headed down to the waiting sport utility vehicle. I had somewhere incredibly important to be tonight, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the past. My driver David navigated through the bustling city streets heading toward the newly developed waterfront district. I looked out the tinted windows, watching the city lights reflect off the dark river. Tonight was the grand opening of my company's newest acquisition. We had just purchased a stunning, massive waterfront event venue. It was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar property featuring glass walls, sweeping outdoor terraces, and an unobstructed view of the city skyline. It was the crown jewel of my catering and event management empire. When we pulled up to the venue, the valet immediately opened my door. I stepped out wearing a tailored ivory pantsuit that commanded the space. The entrance was flanked by towering floral arrangements, and the soft, elegant sound of a live string quartet drifted out into the evening air. My staff was moving with flawless precision, greeting the elite guest list of corporate executives, high-profile clients, and local dignitaries. I walked through the main ballroom, admiring the seamless execution of the event. Every single detail, from the ambient lighting to the custom menu, had been curated by my team. I stepped out onto the expansive private balcony, letting the cool evening breeze wash over me. I stood alone by the glass railing, looking out at the water, taking a moment to simply breathe. I thought about the 19-year-old girl who used to sleep in the back seat of her sedan, wrapping herself in coats to survive the freezing nights. I thought about the tears she shed, wondering why she was not good enough for her own parents to love. If I could reach back through time, I would tell that scared young woman to hold on just a little bit longer. I would tell her that the rejection she was experiencing was not a reflection of her worth, but a redirection toward her ultimate destiny. True family is not defined by who brings you into this world. True family is defined by respect, by loyalty, and by mutual reciprocity. It is defined by the people who stand in front of you when the battle starts, and the people who stay beside you when the dust settles. I heard the soft click of heels behind me. I turned around to see Tasha stepping onto the balcony. She was wearing a stunning sapphire dress, her face glowing with genuine pride. Elias followed right behind her, carrying a silver tray with 3 crystal flutes filled with premium vintage champagne. He had recently accepted my offer to leave his position at Lumiere and join my empire as the executive director of hospitality for this new waterfront venue. They walked over and handed me a glass, We stood together looking out over the incredible property we were currently managing. You did it, Camille Tasha said softly, raising her glass in the cool night air. You built the whole damn castle. I looked at my fierce, brilliant corporate attorney who had fought tooth and nail to protect my assets. I looked at Elias who had orchestrated the perfect restaurant takedown without a second's hesitation. Inside that ballroom was my entire loyal team, the people who worked tirelessly alongside me to build a multi-million-dollar legacy from absolute scratch. This was my real family. These were the people who earned their seat at my table. I raised my crystal flute, the champagne catching the light from the venue. To the Empire, I said, my voice steady and filled with absolute peace. And to the people who helped me build it. We clinked our glasses together, the bright ringing sound carrying out over the water. I took a sip of the cold, crisp champagne and turned back to look through the glass doors of my new venue. I was completely free from the toxic weight of my past. I was no longer the scapegoat, no longer the disappointment, no longer the abandoned daughter begging for scraps of affection. I was the architect of my own reality, reigning over the empire I had built with my own two hands, and my crown had never felt lighter. The hardest truth I had to accept was that sharing DNA does not automatically make someone your family. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need the most protection from. I spent years waiting for an apology that was never going to come, hoping my parents would finally see my worth. But I realized that true power comes when you stop begging for a seat at a toxic table and start building your own empire instead. Blood might tie you to your past, but loyalty, respect, and mutual care are what truly build your future. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace, let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of reclaiming your power.